Hello, I'm Dr. Frances Yahia, and this is the Archetypal Astrology series. And today we're going to do the archetype of the moon, which is the caregiver. If you haven't seen the Who's Who Mythology series, the Hercules Labor series, or the first one of this series, which is the hero or the sun, I recommend it because this is all starting to layer. This particular series is on the levels of consciousness, how to live out the archetype, for instance, of the moon in your chart in a high vibration or a low vibration. So each planet as an archetype, I'm going through the series. So just as a quick reminder, this is the mythology that we're using, which is the Greek mythology. So here we're at Artemis, the caregiver. So this is the version of the myth that we're using for the moon. And Artemis was the twin sister to Apollo. So Apollo was born, Artemis was born first, and immediately within minutes of birth, she had to help her brother be born. Here we start to see the symbolism in the sky where the moon has no light of its own. Wherever you have the archetype of the moon, is going to be a place that you're going to try to steal someone's light. That's why the moon is a trick. I have a book that is called The Shadow Side of the Mother's Love. Every moon archetype by sign and all of its projections, psychologically, talents, weaknesses is listed in that book. I highly recommend it. The moon is that veil that we're using similar to the trickster in order to get our needs met. So it's a trick and it keeps us from actually our hero archetype. So we often have to see Artemis and Apollo together, not only in myth, but the sun and the moon together in the chart to identify what the person got at conception in terms of masculine and feminine energies. This is linked to the law of gender in metaphysics. And so through that lens of masculine and feminine, we're sort of having emanations and viewing the rest of the archetypes. So these are important to start with. So again, here are the varying names. We're doing the caretaker or the nurturer today. The planetary archetype is the moon. And in mythology, in my model that I link back to my spiritual adulting model and my spiritual adulting book, we're looking at Artemis and Demeter. Each of these is not always exact. It is the ones that I've decided to parallel for the sake of the teaching of the archetype. So again, every planet, every archetype has the opportunity to be lived out low level or high level. Archetypes per se are neutral. And so it is the thought that we have attached to the archetype that we got at conception that decides if we think something is positive or negative or low consciousness or high consciousness. I've said this before. I assume we are all working at a low level consciousness. And as these archetypes go through the zodiac or these transits occur, we start to increase the consciousness around it and start to learn to do different things. But some of your planets, perhaps sextiles or trines, may act in a high consciousness level for you. I work mainly with hard aspects, trying to get people to release limiting thoughts and transmute and raise consciousness around that. So I start with the assumption that we are living it out, myself included, in a low level consciousness. So these, and down here is where we are, and we're doing the moon. At the high consciousness, it's the caregiver. In the low consciousness, I apologize that you can hardly see this, it says feminine and masculine. This might be a lens of how you view the feminine by sign and by house. Doesn't make it so, but it's the way that perhaps was mirrored to you. And that's what the archetype does in your particular life. In my particular opinion, the moon is the biggest trick. Like the moon changes faces every day or two, so do we to get our needs met in that house. So with this particular archetype, I do think that most of us have a low level consciousness with the sign and the house in which our moon is, despite any aspects. So one of the things I tell clients when I do my inner child slumber party is give yourself the moon sign and give everybody else the opposite moon sign. So it helps you to set boundaries. So what is the word of consciousness with the moon? It is attachment. Attachment, as Buddha said, is the root of all suffering. If we do not learn to detach, we will suffer. Not only through life, something will be ripped from us, either through our sage archetype of Saturn or our magician archetype of Pluto or our rebel archetype of Uranus, but we also will not get the benefit of building the astral body. The astral body is built as we detach and as we raise consciousness. So the moon is linked to attachment. Now, there are some moons like the Aquarius moon that ironically is, I call it the jellyfish moon. You come in, you pretend that you're present, but you're really pulling out because you don't want to have attachment. But whatever you're attached to, in that case, freedom could be what that native is attached to. So don't think of it as hoarding or things or people. It could be attached to the thought linked to that sign and by house. So the low level consciousness is the slug and the snail. So think of the slug slithering on the ground. Anything that is close to the earth is going to be linked to low level consciousness. So for instance, a serpent, a snake, a slug. The water is also low consciousness, but now it's a snail. And this is a slug, but with a little house on it. So think of those people that have to take everything with them on vacation. They have to take everything, they can't leave anything behind. They're always afraid that they've forgotten something. That idea of, I need all of my belongings is linked to the lower consciousness of the snail. I have to take my whole house with me. It's a metaphor, but so that you can identify. Now with the wine and the blood, we're moving into the higher levels of consciousness. The wine is the hermit crab. So the good thing about the hermit crab is that it outgrows that house, and there's a period of time where it has nothing, so no attachment, and then it goes and finds its new larger house of another snail shell. So now we're starting to see there is an attempt at being detached. There's an attempt of growing out of things that no longer serve me. The mentality and the consciousness level is healthier because I'm actually viewing that there's other possibilities of a metaphorical bigger house or different house or perspective than the one that I'm attached to. And lastly is the scarab. So Carl Jung has his famous synchronicity incident where his client was talking about her scarab lapel, and then there was a scaraboid beetle on his window outside of his office. And here he develops this concept of synchronicity. This is actually a metaphysical law called the law of correspondence. So when you can live in the scarab, which is the highest consciousness, the scarab mythology in Egypt is that the scarab is the moon and it's constantly chasing the sun. It's also linked to a dung beetle, which the metaphor of there of what dung do you need to detach from. But it's this constant chase between the sun and the moon. Again, we see that mythology of Artemis and Apollo, or the sun and the moon needing to balance each other. You cannot just be all feminine or in the hero all masculine. The concept is for us to be whole, we balance masculine and feminine energies, the hero and the caretaker, mainly for ourselves. Obviously, this is all happening in our head, but then projecting that balance out in the world. Any imbalance is illness, and any imbalance in either the masculine or the feminine is going to be projected through one or more of those masculine or feminine archetypes that are in the spiritual adulting map. So when you're counseling a client on their chart, or you are looking at your own chart, look at your sign of your moon. This is how you use this concept of higher low consciousness, and offer to yourself and or your client these options. In a low consciousness, you can stay very attached. And in a high consciousness, you can outgrow something or move something and leave something behind. So neither one is wrong or right. It depends on the situation and what it calls for. Ideally, the balance of both the sun and the moon, or the masculine and feminine, is where we would want to take ourselves and our clients. So let's look at this chart. So this person has a moon in Pisces in the third decan in the ninth. So most of the time when sun and moon is in the ninth house, the native does better outside of the country of origin. And this person, I believe, moved from Europe to the United States. So you oftentimes will see that. Or there'll be a hankering, or in this case, moon, the moon has to do with food and caretaking, that perhaps family or loved ones live abroad, or one of their love languages is food. And it could be an international cuisine. So you can just sort of get those basic characteristics. But in terms of the high level consciousness, when we're looking at the moon, here you have the option. If you go to the levels of consciousness in terms of the animals, what you want to do is perhaps help a Pisces moon that has to have this very enmeshed, codependent, addictive, swallowing nature. This would be a good person to start counseling about the scarab and balancing with their Aries moon. So Aries being the most masculine sign with the masculine sun, and most feminine sign is Pisces with the feminine planet, then this person is structured appropriately to start balancing those. So perhaps jumping right to a scarab metaphor or the hermit crab metaphor would benefit this person.